This is a Hipsters of the Coast podcast. This Doom Travelers podcast is brought to you by Hipsters of the Coast, your destination for magic news, strategy, and entertainment. And by Casthaven, where you can build your magic collection like a pro. Visit casthaven.com for more information.
Alright, welcome to episode 3 of Doom Travelers Weekly, the podcast where we play Destiny and talk about magic. I'm your host, Rich Stein, and I'm joined this week by Matt Jones.
Hello.
Dave McCoy.
Hello.
Matt Colpitz.
Hey.
And Joe, whose last name I should remember.
Schumacher.
That's right, Joe Schumacher.
Hey.
Alright, and this week we are going to be rocking the Iron Banner. For those of you who don't know, the Iron Banner is a special PvP event that happens in Destiny from time to time. That means player versus player. So we're going to jump into the Crucible shortly and try to destroy some other teams and get some sweet Iron Banner reputation, which will let us buy some new toys. In the meantime, we're going to be talking about the worlds and stories of Magic the Gathering. Taking a little break this week from Fate Reforged, which has been the main topic of discussion since it just released, pre-released this weekend, and releases shortly after you'll be listening to this podcast. But we want to take a step back from Fate Reforged and kind of just talk about the world as a whole. So, Magic, of course, nowadays we travel to a new world every few sets. Every block takes place on a new world. Lately we've revisited a few worlds, but for the most part we get a new world every year. This was not always the case, though. For the first 10 years or so of Magic's existence, the entire story took place on the world of Dominaria. So we're now about half of Magic's life on Dominaria, half of it all over the place. What do you guys think? Different world every year? Has it been working? Do you guys like the different worlds? Do you wish we were spending more time in some places?
I would like to say that I always, growing up, thought it was called Dominaria.
It might be. I've always pronounced it Dominaria.
Dominaria sounds correct.
Yeah.
I mean, who of us actually played when we were on Dominaria?
I'm going to be learning a lot on this. I'm going to be learning a lot on this episode. I'm really excited.
I played during was 4th edition or was it revised? Or was revised 4th edition?
Revised was 3rd edition.
Okay, so I played 4th edition, 5th edition mostly when I started. So I played on Dominaria.
Yeah.
So was there any sense of story in those?
Yeah. So Dominaria. Well, the core sets never had story until very recently, but Dominaria's story began with the Brothers' War. So Antiquities was the first set that took place in Dominaria that had an actual story to tell.
Yeah.
They moved away from that story a little bit with sets like Fallen Empires and The Dark. But they came back for the Ice Age. And from Ice Age all the way through to Onslaught Block. So we're talking 1995 until Onslaught Block is 2001, 2002. We're entirely in Dominaria. And we're telling virtually the same story until Odyssey. Odyssey tells a new story. So it's a huge difference, right? So nowadays we get one story in every 3 sets, and that's it. End of story. In the past, it was one massive story that was told in small chunks that were each part of a set. So, how do you guys feel about a new world every year?
Only one path to victory, Guardians.
a new world every year. Like that's the only thing I've ever really played with.
Yeah.
And
So,
I mean, it seems logical. I mean, that like with a core set breaking up every new world. So like every time you go to a new world, you have a core set preceding it. Like that's just the way that I learned to play Magic. So like that feels very familiar to me.
You're falling behind.
And it seems fairly effective. Like you tell stories in 3 acts. So why not tell stories? I mean, traditionally, and so why not tell Magic stories in 3 acts, and each act gets a set. Like that's pretty intuitive. I mean, I think that they'll have an interesting storytelling conundrum now that we're moving to 2 set blocks.
Right.
So theoretically 2 worlds per year, and so like if you stop relying on the 3-act crutch maybe not a crutch, but the 3-act analog of a 3-set block. It'll be interesting to see how their storytelling evolves from there.
yeah, I think with the 2 blocks, and obviously if asking about how everyone feels about having 1 new world every year plays right into having 2 new worlds every year, and whether or not it's a bit of an overload. But I think what we'll end up ultimately seeing is a lot more return to wherever stories, right? Because it's unreasonable, I think, to expect the creative team to come up with 2 brand new worlds on an annual basis.
For sure.
I also think there's tons of stuff to explore in the world. Or the other thing is, there's tons of stuff to explore in each plane that they create. It's also, they call them planes, they don't call them worlds. And I think that's an interesting difference than talking about them as worlds, because they're not. Like, it's not like we go to a different planet, we go to a different realm of existence, right?
Right.
But we also
definitely
go to
the implication. That's definitely the implication of the word plane.
Right.
And like they call it the multiverse instead of the universe. So like they definitely are trying to tell you that there are different planes of existence as opposed to, or like different realities as opposed to just different worlds.
Yeah. Which I think from a storytelling standpoint, it makes it there's much more potential when all of these different things can happen. And it seems to me that when they do create all of these worlds and planes and the people that populate them, they don't necessarily take advantage of that, and they choose fairly redundant good versus evil stories consistently. And what I liked about the old Chan, when I played back in the day with the one world scenario, was that you got to spend a lot of time with this very linear history that they screwed around with a little. You sort of got to know things in like a way, a feeling way, not a thinking way or a reading way, and it was much more coherent and I think nice and interesting. And it didn't feel dumbed down. I feel like everything's so dumbed down now.
Yeah, I think playing off of that, Dominaria felt like a really fleshed out world, right? After spending years on Dominaria, from the Brothers' War all the way through to the Apocalypse, the worlds involved, which were Dominaria, of course, Wrath, which those of you who played Tempest or Mercadian Masks may remember the Wrath block.
Wrath was in Mercadian Masks?
Yeah, wasn't Wrath the Wrath and Mercadia were the worlds. But I thought that Wrath was part of the Mercadian Mask block. I might be wrong about that. Wrath was definitely Tempest block, though.
For sure, yeah, I remember that. That's where Brevin Ilvex is from.
Yep. So for those of you who remember all those worlds, and of course, there wasn't a whole lot else going on outside of those areas. So, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention Phyrexia itself.
Yeah.
Didn't Wrath become Phyrexianized?
I don't think Wrath became Phyrexia. Wrath became the overlay for Dominaria that was used.
Oh, sorry.
But either way, I think that when you did Dominaria the whole time, you got to go to in the Mirage block. You got to go to the tropics of Dominaria, and it implied that the plane itself wasn't a one-dimensional thing like like Ravnica is an entire planet of cities. Like I always hated that about Star Wars too. So where the Jedi Council sits, the entire planet is a city. Like how does that even work? That doesn't make any sense at all. And it just seems shitty. Like all worlds have so much diversity to them, and it's not like the snow world, the hot world. It's so like generalized and like fine-tuned for idiots that it really comes to that. I think there's a lot more that they could do there, and I think the audience is a lot more sophisticated than they think.
So by only being able to tell short stories, they're kind of restricting themselves in a way. But it's not even a restriction, really. It feels like more of a conscious decision to just not flesh out these worlds very much, because they really like. You don't really have to if you're not telling a big story, right? And I think getting back to where we are today with Tarkir, Tarkir really feels like I just feel like I don't know anything about Tarkir as a world other than that there's no dragons, and now there's going to be dragons.
Yeah.
And there's kung fu guys, and there's kung fu guys. What else do they have? They have giraffes. And then there's like traditional Mongolian mythological or actual historical, like tribal setups.
But like, and I mean, you learn some stuff, but if you have all these, you have these 5 tribes, right? 5 clans, and they're at war with each other. And if they're at war with each other, they have to be relatively close to each other. So you've got each tribe seems to represent, through the non-basic lands, a different sort of geographical feature, right? Especially with the fetch lands kind of playing into that whole thing. So, sorry, I was just golden gunning some dudes. So
hard to leave the chat while golden gunning people.
So, with that all said, it's very weird to me that you'd have these 5 clans in close proximity over such a varying landscape, right? Some of them are in the mountains, some of them are in the plains, some of them are in these nomadic desert type lands. You've got rivers. I mean, we now know that there's no oceans on Tarkir, which is very interesting.
And does that mean the whole planet or like the continent of Tarkir?
And that's the thing, right? Like, we don't know. Is it, I mean, what we're kind of assuming, right? Because when Sarkhan Vol is trying to explain to Yasova the concept of being a planeswalker, he says it's like traveling to a land across a body of water that's bigger than any body of water you've ever been to. And she says such a thing doesn't exist, which leads us to believe that there's no ocean on Tarkir, which either means nobody's ever seen the ocean, or it actually doesn't exist.
Or maybe the world's flat.
It could be, but I think back to Matt's point is, it's such an interesting place, and there's so much that you can do in a place that it feels like such a waste to come here.
I think you don't. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. I mean, go on.
Like you don't have to. I don't think that when you create a world, like let's say you create Ravnica, and there's all of these guilds that have specific ties to game mechanics, like Golgari. They're the gross, swampy people who live in the sewers and have this sort of dark magic, and they recycle body parts and stuff. Like that alone is interesting. Like you can have a set that is about those people on their own, and all the intricacies of their societies, the goings on between the characters, and you can have, you don't have to have this epic narrative that is sort of generic and shitty and boring about Niv Mizzet trying to do whatever the hell he was trying to do with whatever, and I just didn't care. And I actually find myself, whenever anybody talks about the flavor of Magic, I think about how interesting the Herloon Minotaur is, just as a thing, and like what his face looked like, and what the like Herloon Minotaur society could have been like, and all of that shit, and how that was interesting enough, and they didn't need to go and make some really cheesy narrative construction on every single set to like keep me interested in the thing. I'm interested in being a powerful wizard shooting spells at people. Like, that's what I want to do. I don't give a fuck that Jace is the living guild pack. I don't even like Jace at all to begin with because he looks like a fucking emo asshole. Like, I'm just not interested. You know? Like, bag of dicks for Jace. I just don't care. You know?
Yeah. No, it's
so like Ravnica's a totally, like, the architecture's fucking crazy that the artists come up with. Like, if you look at any of the world building sketches and all the art that they come up with to like get the flavor for everybody, I get shaking excited looking at those sketches because they're so awesome and there's so much promise. And then you end up like hearing the story and you're like, oh great, the Khans are trying to fight each other. Oh, and they're gonna fight the dragons. Oh, who gives a shit? And why are there dragons in Mongolia? Like, I just don't get it. Like, I don't get any of it. I don't give a shit.
right.
Doesn't
I mean,
feel
in my
authentic to
mind,
me.
in my
Sorry,
mind, the
my rant,
thread
sorry.
in my mind, the thread that kind of pulls together your dissatisfaction and the shift in block sizes and block storytelling is the transition from telling a story about a world, Dominaria, to telling a story about a ship, the Weatherlight, to now their story is completely focused around this group of disparate planeswalkers that don't really hang out together,
Right.
like aren't any part of a real group. They're just like random characters that they made up for Lorwyn, and
And like color
Now
identity
those are the-
purposes.
yeah, and now those are the main characters through which every story is being told. So like Tarkir, right? It could be an interesting world, but it's not really about Tarkir. It's about Sarkhan, because Sarkhan is the planeswalker that's involved. He's the main character, and he hasn't really even been on Tarkir for a while. So like Tarkir is just this place that he's showing up to again. So to me, like it's that change in storytelling that explains why we've moved away from staying in Dominaria to going from plane to plane to plane, so that we can just follow these planeswalkers around instead of learning about
Capture and defend,
a
Guardians.
plane to a deeper level.
It'd be really cool if there was a cantina in some city on Dominaria where all the planeswalkers like secretly got together. It was like Doctor Strange's house, where it looked like a Starbucks, but then when you go inside of it, it's like whatever Arcana, whatever the hell that thing's called.
Yeah.
And that's where all the planeswalkers meet after their adventures and like share their stories, and then each set could be the story of one of the planeswalkers, and they could be
That's
interacting,
cool.
so there could be some kind of synergy between the planeswalkers and each other, or even when they do interact, such as a Johnny and Elspeth. Like, I don't care about that either. And then I did care about Liliana and Garrett. They just like let that go. Like, how did that resolve? I have no. Is Garrett still running around murdering people? Like,
Zone C lost. You
like,
captured
why would I
Zone
spend
A.
time getting invested in one of these stupid stories, and then it doesn't even
Enemy
complete
captured
itself?
Zone C.
So
You know, so I get no
that seems to be the thing that's going on, right? Is that they're telling stories about people now instead of telling stories about worlds.
Yeah.
And so since the story is about the planeswalkers, they're trying to get us invested emotionally in the planeswalkers, right? And obviously having cards that represent the planeswalkers plays into that, right? So so I guess I think I can
I just grenaded myself.
I think I know the answer for Matt,
captured Zone B.
preference-wise. What do you prefer, world stories or people stories?
I prefer that it's done well and it's done really creatively. I love characters, but they deserve development, and they deserve to not be linear tool bags. Like, they're just so shitty.
Zone
Like,
B
oh, Liliana's
lost.
evil. Like, there's more. It's in the new Demonic Tutor art that has the Demonic Tutor carving the
Enemy captured
runes
Zone
or
B.
the spells or whatever black magic is in Liliana's skin permanently forever. Like, there's more story in that one card than in like the rest of what goes on with Liliana. Like, it'd be so interesting to have that be a part of it.
Zone
But it's
C
like
neutralized.
touched upon and then not paid attention to.
Right.
Since they don't commit to like actual storytelling,
Zone
and they
B
just like hedge,
neutralized.
and so we don't get resolution. But we
Zone
also
C
don't get enough room to create stuff ourselves as viewers and players. It's like sort of forced how everything is and how what everything means.
Well, forced. I think the key is forced, right? So like these characters were not invented to be story, like the crux of stories. These characters were invented for their color identities, so that they could be a new card type with color identities. And I think a key part of character that Wizards is currently ignoring is context, right? So like you can't just drag the same character from context to context to context and have them be the same. And having the Planeswalkers change, like they haven't really shown a willingness to change their main characters. Whereas while the settings have changed and the context have changed, they've come up with awesome like minor characters, like the on Innistrad, the brother and sister, the Ghoul Razors,
Gisa and Geralf.
Yeah, like those two were very interesting minor characters, mostly because of their context. You know, like that's the kind of
like they belong
that's
to
what I'm
that
trying
world.
to get to. Yeah, exactly. Whereas these Planeswalkers don't belong to any of the worlds, and they're very rarely affected by the different contexts that they get put into. And so like you just lose a huge amount of character development and interest, like user or
it's like we get small pieces of what could be a very interesting story.
Enemy captured Zone A.
But they're not so small. Like before those two characters became actual legendary creature cards, it was cool that you'd had like Geralf's messenger. You know, it's cool that they like showed up in the game in different parts.
Yeah,
but they never actually revealed themselves, and I liked that mystery. And that's part of my article this week was about that, and I liked that. They're like, I don't know, I can't think of any other ones right now. But it's always interesting to see where like a Planeswalker shows up in the art of the card.
Right. I mean, you used to have cards like Limdul had a lot of cards in Ice Age, and but I mean they gave some characters legendary cards, and that was all right. Characters like Gerard and the cast of the Weatherlights had cards, but I get what you're saying, right? It's they're just not doing enough, it seems, to develop Planeswalker stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, it's also like
they're creating these fantastic worlds.
Hey, Merkers.
Sorry, go on, Dave.
Oh well, when they tie their stories to these Planeswalkers, they tie you to characters you may already dislike. You know? Whereas, you're never going to get me to care about the Planeswalkers that already exist because I don't think they're very interesting characters. Whereas when you stick in one world and you constantly go find new people that are part of this world, like you have a greater chance of finding someone that I might be interested in.
Yeah.
That's
I think Nicol Bolas is kind of an interesting Planeswalker. He's probably. I think Garrett could be a really interesting Planeswalker, but I don't think we do a good job with him. What's the white one? Gideon? Gideon is the biggest piece of shit Planeswalker they've ever come up with. I can't stand that. Chandra's a little too steampunk to be interesting. No offense for our steampunk fans. Joe, sorry I said that.
Zone C.
I'm not a steampunk fan.
Joe, come on. Joe, you're safe, buddy. You can talk to us.
Enemy captured
Well,
Zone
I'm not a
C.
steampunk fan.
We're just developing your character, Joe. You are now a steampunk fan.
You know, I think you touched on an interesting point with Nicol Bolas as a Planeswalker, because Nicol Bolas is more than just a Planeswalker, right? He's a major villain of the Magic story, and you know, when you say, "Oh, it'd be really interesting if there was a cantina where they all hung out," right? Well, in theory, the villains ought to be in some way tying the characters together. Kind of like how the better villains tie together teams in comic books, like the Avengers all get together to fight monsters, to fight Ultron, or the X-Men all get together to fight the Sentinels. They're characters that are villains, and Nicol Bolas should be that sort of a character. And I think you're starting to see them hint on that sort of thing with the Eldrazi. But it's just on too small of a scale for my liking. Because it's only like 2 or 3 planeswalkers. It's not an actual group of planeswalkers.
Yeah. I also, just as an aside, the Eldrazi, I think it's funny that the name sounds Italian because one of them very clearly is pasta. And I just love that. I don't think they did it on purpose, but it's hilarious.
The Eldrazi are an interesting enemy because they're seemingly all-powerful, right?
Right.
Wow, I just got Nova bombed while pulling out the golden gun. But the Eldrazi really ought to be tying together more of the story in a way that a central location would. But we don't have a central location for all the planeswalkers anymore. So
Does Dominaria doesn't exist anymore? It's like part of.
no, it does. It does exist, and we last visited Dominaria for the Time Spiral story. So there's definitely a possibility that we'll travel to Dominaria again. Mark Rosewater has said he wouldn't be surprised if we do have stories in Dominaria again, but for now the creative team decided to take a break from Dominaria for whatever reasons. And I think that's fine, because I think there's other worlds that can be interesting in the ways that Dominaria was interesting. But I don't think they've figured that out exactly yet, because
I think they just need less linear, less one-dimensional storytelling. Like trust your viewers to fill in the gaps a little bit. Like give us hints of things instead of just giving us the things.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
they kind of do leave some to your imagination, like the end of the Theros story with Elspeth hanging out in the underworld. Like that's actually kind of an interesting little setup where, like, we never really got to visit the underworld. We've never really experienced a dead planeswalker who's not really dead. Like, is Venser hanging out in the underworld with her? I don't know. Like, I don't know. It's kind of an interesting way to have ended the
that was.
I think
like the underworld of Theros. It's not like, is that a universal underworld?
I have no idea. But anyway, that's just like something that they haven't spelled out is exactly what her status is. Like, is she like the first zombie planeswalker? Are we gonna have tribal planeswalkers now? Like, what's
that would be awesome. It's really crazy. Like, I hear people. Dan Black used to tell me all the time. He's like, "Well, I want to play Magic while it still has something interesting going on," and it's like, or before it like before it drifts away because people aren't playing it anymore because it's not good. And I was, oh look, I got a. That's great. It's like the Shatter White of Crucible.
Nice, congratulations.
and I was thinking, like, there's no way that Magic could ever run out of potential ways to evolve and change itself.
Right.
There's just no way. Like, even just giving planeswalkers a creature type, like that alone is something that
if they made zombie planeswalkers, like I'd come back and play Magic for zombie planeswalkers. For real.
There's definitely a lot of design space left in Magic.
Just like, what if they did a set where they killed all of them and then they brought all of them back as like a like they were all like they had to be red, black, green, black, white. Like they made one for every color, but it had to have black in it too. So it's, oh man, or green, black. Oh, come on.
Did they ever do a set that was only focused on certain colors? I took a huge break.
They did, and it was very bad.
Do you think they could do it better now?
I don't.
Well, Rich, hold on. Which part of it was bad? The limited experience was bad, right?
The limited experience was a disaster.
But the story,
I want everyone to be in on this joke because Dave and I. So the block in question is Odyssey, Odyssey, Torment, and Judgment, and the way that block was structured is each set was very focused on certain colors or had less of a different color, and explicitly Torment was very heavily black, and it really skewed the limited environment. Mark Rosewater's talked about it a few times. The general response to Odyssey from the players was very poor, and that's mostly because drafting Odyssey block was just a It was a very unfun experience because it was impossible to know what colors people were going to end up in, because all the good cards were in 1 or 2 colors in each pack.
But I feel like people like playing that block now.
Oh, there's definitely a nostalgia aspect to it, but I mean, if you think about it, I mean, Sengir Vampire was a rare that you could open in Torment. Nantuko Shade. There was a cycle of
finally getting the respect he deserves.
There was a cycle of non-basic lands that would add black or another color to your mana pool, so long as you controlled a swamp.
This sounds like my favorite set ever.
Yeah, exactly.
Nantuko Shade's in it. I'm like, yeah.
Where I was trying to go with saying that it was the limited environment that sucked. It wasn't necessarily the story aspect. Is that what we have to keep in mind, that Magic isn't a story, right? It's a game with 5 colors and a limited environment that is supposed to be served by every regular expansion set, right?
True.
So the reason the Odyssey block wasn't successful was because they tried to tell a story through the cards, but forgot that they were trying to support the 5-color mechanic, and it seems like they've made sacrifices to keeping the game stable, storytelling sacrifices in order to keep the game stable and to keep every draft environment a fun, expected draft environment, So that's like a huge limitation on their ability to actually tell a story.
It's true. Shit is mad hard because of all the whiny limited players out there.
Yeah, but I mean they have opportunities now, like with Conspiracy and not really Modern Masters, but Conspiracy area and Commander decks to tell stories in spaces where they don't have to follow the 5-color, they have to support all 5 colors for the draft environment, So that seems like a big space where they could actually perhaps start to tell side stories or non-linear stories, or develop new characters in, like Duretti. Duretti seems like a very interesting character, and he was mentioned way back in the day because he lost his wife, and he wanted to make artifacts to replace her, rebuild her as an artifact, and now he's a commander planeswalker, and that's the kind of niche storytelling that they could use these non-expansion products to do. Because that's not tied to a single world, that's not tied to a planeswalker that they've already developed that is just so tied to its color identity that they couldn't do anything interesting. So it'll be interesting now that they're printing a lot more cards than they used to, and a lot more sets than they used to. It'll be interesting to see if they can actually pull off some interesting storytelling through those cards.
Zone A.
I think you just set a world record for saying the word interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
I think there's definitely a lot they could do. Oh man, getting sick of this guy sniping.
I'm getting killed.
Yeah, well, it's because I spawn with Icebreaker, so I have no ammo. Anyways, first world problems.
Yes, Icebreaker problems.
Yeah,
I just spawned and got sniped instantly. Also, that sucks.
Where is he?
I'm gonna go find that guy. He's over past C. If you're coming from A, he's past C.
Half their team is snapping.
You captured Zone A.
On the whole, I think they do a great job with the stories and trying to please all the limited players, who I think are probably the whiniest of all the players that play Magic. And they also they're the ones that need the most tending to, right? Because they just open packs and pull cards and make decks out of these cards. If it doesn't work, if that doesn't work, that's like a miserable 3+ months for them.
Yeah.
It's true, and in the past, bad limited environments have directly led to a lot of negative feedback, but not as much as a bad constructed environment, right? A bad constructed environment can kill the game, and we've seen that before with Mirrodin, right? So Mirrodin was an attempt to do storytelling through the cards again, and This time it was all artifacts.
Nice job, Jim.
And the result was just one of the worst constructed environments ever.
Why is that? What was it? What was some of the...
Affinity.
Ravager.
Zone C.
Affinity was just a wretched experience.
Zone A neutralized.
So you know,
Captured
it's
Zone C.
they've obviously gone to great effort to redesign the way they tell stories through cards, and I can't blame them because it's definitely
Enemy
bitten
captured
them before.
Zone A.
But I think they lost something along the way, and I think the dichotomy between telling stories about worlds and telling stories about the planeswalkers is where that line exists that they need to find, and they may have swung the pendulum too far in one direction in favor
I love
of
One Direction.
You would, man. Freaking One Direction and Kelly Clarkson are your favorite things.
Sure.
But too far in the direction of telling stories about characters, and the exchange is that we don't learn and we don't get as many interesting
Zone
things
A
anymore
neutralized.
about the world itself. And you know, you can see that in Tarkir, because everything revolves
Zone A is
around
captured. It's
Sarkin's choice of cons and dragons, right?
Yeah.
And it's a very linear story because the choice he's going to make is already obvious, right? We all know he's going to choose dragons. He's going to save Ugin, whatever that means.
Zone B
And
lost.
Well, we could be getting set up for an unexpected plot twist, but that seems kind of outside of Wizards'
yeah,
range.
yeah. I think at this point, Wizards tends to play the stories very safe.
Oh shit, I just fell off the board again.
You know, there's a reason trope stories are successful, right? People,
We're familiar.
right? People are used to them. They're relatable. People are familiar with it.
Heavy ammo on the way.
It's you know, it's something. It's a safe bet. And you know what I'd really like to see is, obviously, I think we'd all like to see them take a little bit
Heavy
more,
ammo available. Zone
a
B
few more
secure.
chances with the storytelling than they
The thing is,
currently do.
they're a big company that needs to make a bunch of money to please a bunch of people, and I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think it makes any sense for them to do that.
5
For them
minutes
to do it
remaining.
themselves. Like, I'm all for it because fuck money, fuck responsibility, but
Right.
they would not feel that way. I wouldn't.
No,
I think you always
know,
go for the art.
I think there's
Right.
certainly no question that Wizards is under a lot of pressure to perform financially, right? They are the only successful part of that company really today. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons has started to come back, but
Because the new Dungeons and Dragons is kind of sweet.
yeah.
Just as
Enemy
an
captured
aside.
Zone B.
But I think Magic the Gathering, you know, there's a lot of pressure for them to keep doing well. And if they stopped doing well, I think it would, you know, they're afraid that things would get negative very quickly. So they don't take a lot of chances with the storytelling. And it's
They tend to not take chances when they don't have to take chances.
right. And again, I think this goes back to something we talk about a lot offline, which is that Wizards is very good at designing the game, Magic the Gathering. But they
awesome.
Zone B
have a lot of
neutralized.
problems when it comes to virtually everything else
Zone
related
B secure.
to Magic the Gathering.
Zone A lost.
So, Rich, you've been playing for a long time, and you've been going to a lot of pre-releases.
Enemy captured.
Have these
Zone
new
B.
pre-release events increased your experience or understanding of the story behind these blocks, or are they detracting from the experience? Like, what
Zone B
how have you felt that transition?
I think sometimes it goes a little too far. But for the most part, I think
Enemy
it's
captured zone B.
a
Looks
big
like you've
improvement
misjudged your enemy.
in sharing what the story is with
Only the
people.
strong survive.
It used to be very difficult to ascertain what was going on without reading the books. But now they do a much better job, I think, of trying to immerse players in the story. That said, I think it's very hit or miss, right? Things like this pre-release, the Fate Reforged pre-release, where you're interacting and you're building, you're trying to save Ugin, is very immersive. I think the story of opening the Hell Vault when Avacyn Restored came out was very immersive. But some of the Ravnica stuff was just really not very interesting at all.
It was so dorky to have it end with everybody running in a maze.
Yeah.
What the hell? Who cares about a maze?
This
Like we're doing all this, like we can shoot lightning out of our hands and reanimate dead things, and we're gonna run around in a maze? What are we, freaking some shitty Harry Potter knockoff? Like, what are we doing?
the story of Return to Ravnica was very disappointing, I felt.
I think the conclusion was very disappointing. The whole second or third part was real bad.
Yeah, and it's a shame because there's a lot of interesting things they could do with a place like Ravnica. But again, we didn't get a story about Ravnica. What we had was a story about Jace, and I guess somewhat a story about Niv Mizzet, but really it was just a story about Jace.
Mostly about Jace.
Yeah. Jace, of course, is the most popular Planeswalker.
Which blows my mind, because he's the silliest looking Planeswalker.
He is the most beloved and the most hated of all the Planeswalkers, which makes him the most popular. I'm not a huge fan of Jace as a character. I'm not terribly thrilled that he's the quote-unquote face of the Planeswalkers. I think he makes it difficult to relate to Planeswalkers, right? As a Magic player. I think as a Magic player, Matt, you said earlier, you're a powerful wizard. You're throwing spells, you're summoning creatures, you're building these fantastic artifacts, you're erecting these enchantments that protect you or harm your opponent.
I remember some early Magic book that I read that was exactly that. Like, you were reading the story of a guy who was becoming a more powerful, like, duelist, essentially, right? Do you remember that book where he would always fight in an arena?
Yeah, it's called Arena. The book's called Arena. Yeah.
Not that well written, but it was like that's what Magic felt like to me too. And it's the only time I've really felt that the game was able to tell me the story of how I was experiencing fighting.
Right. Yeah, and it's nowadays the story is similar but different because now you're a Planeswalker.
Only one path to victory.
But
Which is just like a super wizard with special dimensional powers.
Right, and that's why I think a lot of players relate to Jace because that's kind of who he is. Or you relate to Chandra, but
I just punched their entire team down, triple down on punches only. Sorry, continue.
But I think it's difficult to relate to the Planeswalker story. The idea of being a Planeswalker, and I think the pre-release really could do more to give you that Planeswalker feeling, but I'm not really sure how. It's a very difficult prospect, right? How do you make people feel like they're part of something bigger instead of, or do we? Is there even a reason to do that?
I think it'd be cool if, and this is just I just thought of this now. Like, I don't relate to any of the Planeswalkers because the Planeswalkers aren't like me, a player. Like, they're not in this game. They're like characters in the game that I play, so it's hard for me to identify as one of them. And so maybe there should be, like, we should be called something else so that it makes sense to us, you know, like we're this other thing. I don't know, that's just something I think.
I think it's,
So I definitely don't feel like Liliana. I don't feel like any of them.
right, and that's a problem, right? Is because I think that having the players be planeswalkers makes sense because it explains how we travel from world to world and meet these characters and take part of these stories. But at the same time, it's very much difficult to relate to being a planeswalker because the main planeswalker characters just aren't very relatable to a lot of people.
You
And
captured Zone B.
the ones that are relatable are kind of just tropes.
Yeah, like
so
is Gideon supposed to be super relatable to all the white men out there?
I mean, I suppose so. You know, he's a paladin, right? So he appeals to the honorable side of us. And, you know, and they all have their appeal, but, like, it gets very difficult to relate to a character like Tybalt, right?
Heavy ammo available.
Or
Yeah.
relate to a lot of these characters. It's just not very.
Damn it, you stole my heavy ammo, Dave.
I mean, so these minor characters that they're making the planeswalkers, like Tybalt, like Domri Raid, are they really supposed to be relatable? Because they're not really main characters, you know? They're just like side characters that were for some reason made into planeswalkers.
Right, but that's
like,
the
I really
thing
don't-
is, planeswalkers are supposed to be the front and center, right? We're planeswalkers. We're front and center. So when you have these characters that are periphery, but they're planeswalkers, it kind of sends a mixed message because you're like, oh, these guys should be front and center, but then they're not. And I think that it sends a mixed message. About
what defines a planeswalker in this game, right? It's having a spark, which allows you to travel from plane to plane, right?
Correct.
That's what defines a planeswalker. So, is part of being a planeswalker being able to cast spells? Is that part of being a planeswalker?
No, it's literally just being able to travel between worlds. I think all of them so far use mana to cast spells, so I think it has to be both, really.
Does Garrett cast spell?
Yeah. He summons creatures.
True.
That's how Garrett casts spells.
I just thought he just smashed with the wall.
He should,
He
but
does make a bunch of beasts.
he does, right? That's his thing, is summoning the wild. And I think that's relatable, and I wish they would do more to develop the stories of the more relatable planeswalkers.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been so if we were to recast Khans of Tarkir as a story about Sarkhan rather than a story in which what Sarkhan's doing is the only thing that's going on.
Right.
Yeah.
So for example, we explore Tarkir through, say, Sarkhan's past, or Sarkhan. He was there and now he's returned. So like either explore through his past or how he is now re-experiencing things that from his childhood, or re-encountering people like Zergo, who knew him before he left and apparently
Neutralized.
disagrees.
Midgard and I just equally,
You
we
captured
just both did our
Zone
super simultaneously. It was awesome.
But anyway, I think that'd be an interesting way of recasting Khans of Tarkir as an exploration of Sarkhan as a character, either through his past or through him re-experiencing his past by meeting people
Heavy
who used to
ammo
know him,
inbound.
or experiencing things
Yeah.
that he remembers, that kind of thing. Yeah. But anyway,
Heavy ammo available.
Yeah, we are beating the dick out of this team, though.
Yeah, we are winning pretty good
because
at
we've
that
lost 3 in a
time.
row.
So I guess
Yeah.
we've talked a lot about the different things. We're getting down to the end here. Final thought: if you could change one thing about the way we do storytelling for Magic, what would it be? Matt Jones.
Matt Jones.
Zone
One
B,
thing I would
lost.
change.
Zone C, secure.
I don't know. I would make
Enemy
characters
captured
less
Zone
one.
A.
I would not make it like good. It just seems good versus evil all the time. Good versus evil, and I think that's actually a huge problem with our society. That all the stories seem to be revolved around good versus evil.
So you want to see
So I
more
just
gray
cut that out.
area, less black and white storytelling.
Secure.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Dave, what would you like to
Yeah,
see?
like to just to build off Matt's, like a conflict of interests rather than just like a conflict of good versus evil. You know, like you can have a white villain, right? But and that's usually based on that character's interests, like the fact that they want
Well done. I could have used
something
your
that they
talent
think
in
is
the
good
field.
through means that other people disagree with, that kind of stuff. So I think that would be an interesting way of telling stories. But the one thing I would probably change is this requirement that the planeswalker that's central to the story is the only part of the story, but that it's not really about them. So instead of making Khans of Tarkir about Sarkhan, but mostly just about Sarkhan finding Ugin, like make it about Sarkhan and like actually explore Sarkhan and his relationship to this plane, rather than just using him as a driver for the plot. That would be perhaps hard to do in a card game. I don't really know, but
Right,
but that
more,
would probably make it a lot easier to relate to these characters and perhaps tie together some of the weaknesses that we've been exploring too.
so
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
explore more of how the planeswalkers deal with conflict on a personal level or on a more of a deeper level than what we've seen, rather than just telling and kind of get more into their relationship with other things, right? Because right now you're right, they're pretty much just vehicles for telling the story.
Yeah,
Matt
they
Colpitts
just don't have a soul on their own. I don't
yeah.
think they could stand up on their own.
Matt Colpitts, if you could change anything about how we do storytelling for Magic.
I would make it a lot simpler. Just one character, one card, one color. It'd be called the Colpitts Starter Magic Pack.
I want it.
Yeah, I'm gonna put in an order for 5.
There you go. Joe?
I mean, I didn't even know they were trying to tell you a coherent story in this game. So I'm pretty sure they're just trying to sell you guys more things.
They are
it's
always
like-
trying to sell us more things. And it's true,
Yeah.
I feel like some of those things that they're trying to sell us that are extraneous, and we haven't even touched on things like the dual decks or conspiracy, those sorts of products. They are just pushing more, Commander especially, more planeswalkers, less. It's really more characters, more and more characters, and we're getting less and less of their story. And I
I'd
think
rather know fewer things better than more things.
quality over quantity, right?
Yeah, I just want to know where is Karn from and how can I play him more often.
Yeah.
That's really what I want.
I think if
Rich,
I
before we go, I want to hear something about your pre-release experience. Because you and Dave, I think, are the only two who went.
I actually was not able to attend, but
Oh, you didn't go.
no, I was not able to attend. But Dave, you went, right?
Yeah, I think the pre-release was pretty standard for pre-releases. I was talking to other people who range from just casual, this is the only thing I do in like organized Magic, to other spikes like me, and there seems to be a general fatigue about these seeded packs and like this forced like identifying with a color or a clan or a character kind of thing. It doesn't really seem to like serve the story anymore. It's not novel anymore, and like you don't quite understand why we're doing it. And then the whole opening Ugin's vault thing was kind of
Ugin had a vault too.
yeah, opening I don't know, something happened But I
Does it
couldn't
look like
tell
the
if it was just
Hellvault?
because. Yeah, I couldn't tell if it was just because the employees were tired because they did the midnight pre-release and the 9 a.m. pre-release. But yeah, I mean,
Bravo team.
the cards were fun. The fact that it wasn't a real sealed format was weird, but it was still fun to play with a lot of the new cards, so I can't really complain. You kind of have to take them for what they are, which is just like a chance to play with cards that no one's ever played with, not really a coherent
Right.
competitive experience.
Yeah, I think the seeded pack thing is probably worn out its welcome. I think there's something to be said. There's something to be said for seeded packs when there's a lot of complexity, such as in a set like that has multiple colors. So like when you have a 2-color set or a 3-color set like Khans of Tarkir, I think it's important to have a seeded pack with non-basic lands, with mana fixers, and that sort of thing, because you want people to be able to actually play with the cards, right? You don't want anyone to feel bad because their pool didn't have the right fixing or their pool didn't have access to the right colors. So from that perspective, I think it's sensible. But in general, yeah, I don't think there's really a lot of need for it anymore for a set like Fate Reforged. So hopefully they'll take a look at that and they'll make some improvements.
Yeah, I mean, despite the shortcomings of the actual, like, what Wizards give stores, like, Luis and the 20-sided store do a great job every single time during these events, so, like, they're always fun. So,
Yeah.
can't complain there.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to being able to have fun with the other people there, and that means having a good environment to play Magic in. And 20-sided store does a good job of that,
Yeah.
but not everyone does. So, and final,
Was
yeah.
there anything you wanted to change about the stories, Rich? I don't think we got to.
Oh, I feel like just the lack of cohesion between characters, right? And I think the biggest thing about Magic is, as a game, is the relationships that you get to build with the other people you play with, right? I think for a lot of people, the hugest thing about Magic the Gathering is that we all get together, you play this game with your friends, you travel to tournaments with your friends, and if we're all Planeswalkers, then we're Planeswalkers who are friends. So I'd like to see a little more cohesion, not just Elspeth and Ajani, right? I think, even this Ugin, Sorin, and what's her name, Nahari, the Geomance, Nahiri, even that really feels just like a forced alliance rather than an actual friendship amongst Planeswalkers. So I'd really like to see more cohesion between the characters. That's what I would change.
Agreed. That sounds great.
And that's, yeah. Final thought before we sign off for the episode. What is your favorite plane for Magic? Matt.
Innistrad.
Innistrad. Dave?
Man, I've only been to, this is my 4th plane I think I've experienced. So, I mean, in
Dave,
terms
did you
of...
play Innistrad?
I didn't play Innistrad itself, just Absent Restored.
So you should just say Innistrad. 'cause it's
Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good.
Honestly, I really enjoyed Theros, not because of the story, not because of the particulars of the story, but just because of the environment. Like, it was easy to relate to the Greek trappings and everything, so I quite enjoyed that.
Mine is hands down Ravnica. The original Ravnica story was just the setting. I think was far and beyond the deepest world setting that Wizards has ever come up with, even though it's just one city. I think the ideas, the concepts of the guilds resonates a lot with a lot of players. And I think in general there's so much storytelling you could do in a world
Enemy captured.
like Ravnica, and I really hope that over time especially what's
Better.
outside of it, because there is a wasteland of sorts outside the main city of Ravnica.
That's where the Sluiceway scorpions hang out, right?
Yeah,
Lost the lead.
it's where the Nephilim are from. It's where a lot of things happen. So yeah, Ravnica. And I think with that we can call it a close. This has been episode 3, and if somebody could remind me how to shut this thing off, that'd be great.
Oh, shit.
Hey Guardians, thanks for tuning in to the Doom Travelers podcast, where we discuss Magic the Gathering while playing Destiny. You can find more at doomtravelers.com or visit hipstersofthecoast.com for additional Magic content. Thanks to Matt Colpitz and Joe Schumacher for joining us in the Iron Banner this week, and thanks to my hometown Seattle Seahawks for making it to the Super Bowl once again. For my co-hosts Rich Stein and Matt the Obliterator Jones, I'm David Bones McCoy. See you next time.
Nothing past William Howard Tucker.